Hello, my name is Keshwani. That's Keshwani, Keshwani. I have been solving data sufficiency problems out of this book here, GMAT Review, the official guide, the 12th edition. If you do not own this book already, purchase one immediately. You should be able to find it at mba.com. The problem that I'm about to solve is the one that you're going to find on page number 276, data sufficiency problem, hence the DS, because down the road I'm going to do the multiple choice questions as well, but that will come much later. Data sufficiency problem number 38. Let's see what it has to say. It is important that you have the book in front of you and read the problem with me. Okay, so here we go. It says if P1 and P2 are the populations, alright, so apparently we're dealing with two sample sizes of P1 and P2, or maybe the whole populations. It says they are the populations. Well, let's read the rest. And R1 and R2 are the number of representative of district 1 and district 2. So, alright, so their population as it says there. And R1 and R2 are representative of district 1 and district 2. The question simply is the ratio of population to the number of representative is greater for which of the two districts. So they want us to find this ratio. I should have written the other way around, but you get the idea. The ratio of the population to the number of representative. Well, actually that's what they were looking for. Population to number of representative they want us to find out which ratio is greater, this ratio or this ratio, population to representative. The ratio of population and number of representatives is greater for each of the two districts. Alright, let's see what the first statement gives us. Before we actually solve the problem, since this is a data sufficiency problem, very first thing we do before we forget it is to write down A, D, B, C, E to keep track of our answer choices, to keep track of our inventory. The first statement tells us that P1 is greater than P2. Is that enough to figure out which ratio is greater? Of course not. All you have told me is that this numerator is greater than this numerator. But without having any knowledge of R1 and R2, we cannot ascertain as to which ratio is greater. For example, 1000 is greater than 100, but we know nothing about R1 and R2. If R1, I should have put this here. For example, if R1 is 50 and R2 is 5, then these ratios are equal. On the other hand, if R1 is more than 50, then this ratio will be greater. Or if R2 is more than 5, then this ratio will be greater. This is 50 and this is 6, this ratio will be greater because we do not know what R1 and R2 are, therefore we cannot tell which ratio is greater based solely on the information that is given in statement 1. The statement 1 is not enough by itself to answer which ratio is greater. Therefore we know now that the answer cannot be A, nor can it be D. Answer would have to be either B, C or E. Let's look at second statement. Answer would turn out to be B if the information based only on the second statement is enough to answer this question. If not, we'll try putting them together, statement 1 and statement 2, and we'll see where it takes us. Let's see what the statement 2 says. There you go. Statement 2 says R2 is greater than R1. Now again, knowing simply that R2 is greater than R1 and having no knowledge at all about P1 and P2 is not enough to tell us which ratio is greater. So second statement by itself is also not enough. The answer cannot be B. Answer would have to be C or E. Let's put the two information together. So I know that P1 is greater than P2. This guy is greater than this. P1 is greater than this 2. and we know that R2 is greater than R1. If it helps you, let's make up numbers. P1 over R1 and P2 over R2. We know here P1 is greater than P2, so same as before, let's put down 1000 and 100. So far we do not know which ratio is greater because we do not know anything about R1 and R2. But when we go to second statement clearly tells us that even though the second population is smaller, even though there are fewer people living in the second district, because P2 is smaller than P1, despite that fact, the number of representatives from second district is actually more than the number of representatives from the first district. Therefore, this ratio has to be greater. Let's say, for example, this is 10 and this is 5. As you can see, this ratio, even though it has fewer people, it only has 100 people compared to 1,000 people, but despite the fact that it has fewer people, it has more representative. So this ratio is going to be larger. This ratio, in the example that I made up, this is going to be 10 and this is going to be not even 1/10. 1/10 would have been 100 over 1,000 over 10. This is 1/20th. So as you can clearly see, this is much bigger. That's all. This is not 1/20th. What is it? I'm drawing a blank here. This is embarrassing. 1,000. Yeah, 1/200, not 1/20th. I knew it wasn't 1/20th because in order for this ratio to be 1/20th, this ratio would have to be half of this ratio. But we already know that this ratio is 1/10, and I can clearly see that this ratio is not half of this ratio. This ratio is much smaller. It is 1/20th. That's how I quote myself. But anyway, the point here is that if you tell me that there are more people, this is what they're basically telling us. The gist, the nub. Well, if you don't know the word, look it up and learn it. Since I used the word, I have to introduce it. Open the dictionary and learn it properly. N-U-B, nub. The gist, the nub, the essence, the core of the whole thing is that what you're telling me is that District 1 has more people but fewer representative. Well, if it has more people and fewer representative, then that ratio of population representative will have to be smaller ratio. Or in other words, what you're telling me is that District 2 has fewer people. P1 is greater than P2, so District 2 has fewer people, but it has more representative. If it has fewer people and more representative, then this ratio would have to be larger than this ratio. That's all. I think I explained too much. But anyway, that's all it is. So bottom line here is that putting the two statements together is enough for us to figure out which ratio is greater. It turns out this ratio is greater. That's all. That's all. Because it has fewer people, but more representative. That's all. Well, it depends on how you do the ratio. If you do it this way or the other way, the point is not exactly which one is greater and which one is smaller. The point here is that we can figure out the inequality, depending on which ratio. You're talking about population to representative or representative population. That's all. But it can be figured out. That's all. I hope you found it helpful. If you wish to get hold of me for personal private tutoring, face-to-face tutoring, or tutoring over the Skype or through the telephone and so forth, go to my website at www.prep.for4 GMAT.com and send me an email. Or you can go to www.keshwaniprep.com and send me an email. Alright? Thanks.